From the perspective of an assessor, assessment can be classified under different types such as self-assessment, peer assessment, teacher assessment, expert assessment, computer-based assessment, online assessment, computer-assisted assessment, and a group assessment. In this lecture, we will take up the self-assessment and peer assessment. The term self-assessment is self-explanatory in its meaning. Thus, self-assessment is an assessment done by oneself on one's learning. So a person is assessing himself or herself of what was learned against what was supposed to be learned. Therefore, self-assessment is activating a learner. It therefore promotes an activated learning and autonomy in learning. Self-assessment promotes autonomy in learning. In the 21st century, the learning is expected to be, or the learner is expected to be an autonomous learner who can learn deeper and at the higher domains of learning, such as understanding, analyzing, applying, synthesizing, evaluating, etc. We have come to the realization that learning and assessment are the two sides of the same coin, and therefore they cannot be seen separately by asking the question which one precedes and which one follows. These two go parallelly with each other, and therefore learning without assessment is not possible, and assessment without learning is not possible. These two go hand in hand. Therefore, we have evolved with a new principle called assessment as learning. In this process, a learner is setting the goals of assessment or objectives of assessment and frames the criteria for assessment, and using the criteria and the tools of assessment tries to compare the status with what was expected by the learner. Self-assessment, therefore, starts with objectives set by the assessor, who is the learner himself, and he is also fixing what should be the level of learning or to what extent he should learn, and he should also know the level of learning according to what was expected, using some strategies or techniques of assessment, and from which he would be able to find out the gaps or issues in the process of learning. So, self-assessment is, unlike the behaviorist assessment, makes a learner active, not. Let us see the functions of self-assessment. It promotes reflective thinking because a learner needs to move backward to know what was aimed at, and he has to move forward and know what is learned and find out the gaps between these two, again going back and coming forward. As this process is continuously done, a person is involving in reflective thinking actively. And in the process of self-assessment, the learner herself should frame the assessment objectives, setting criteria, develop metacognitive skills, imbibe the value of self-reliance, develop the skill of sustainable monitoring practices, should imbibe the habit of active learning, developing evaluation skills, consolidating the entire area of learning, and thus finally becomes an autonomous learner. I would repeat this. Self-assessment promotes reflective thinking in a person. It helps in setting the goals, setting the criteria, helps the person to develop the skill of monitoring and consolidating the knowledge gained. It therefore promotes autonomous learning. It develops the metacognitive skills of a person. Therefore, it promotes deep learning, unlike the behaviorist approach that may result in only surface learning by rote memorization. This also develops the quality of self-reliance in a person and develop evaluation skills. Evaluation here helps a person to know the quality of what was learned, how it was assessed, what was the bias or prejudices involved, etc. Setting criteria here refers to knowing or asking a question. How should I know whether I reached the goals? To what extent I should have achieved the goals? What should be the level of my learning, etc. To be decided in advance. Using this framework, one should come to a conclusion that whether what she has learned is of what was expected before. The self-assessment process is not without limitations. There may be so many, but there are a few listed here, such as bias, as the assessor may subject to his own bias because his limited knowledge in a field may be the reason for his bias. Secondly, it may be a time-consuming process, and in this process, a person may develop mental fatigue. It requires a very good sustainable practice. If not this practice, without practice, a person will not be able to sustain this habit. This may develop some self-justification or self-excuses for not being done in the right way and awarding greater marks. Definitely, it requires more effort, and it is a self-monitoring process. Therefore, a person may sometimes fail to monitor himself or herself. Let us go to next assessment in our topic today, that is peer assessment. This term is also self-explanatory as assessment, if done by the peer group members, then that is the peer assessment. Peers are the members of the same learning. They belong to the same grade level, or sometimes members of a group within that same grade level, segregated either by their achievement levels or any other criterion developed by the teacher. Both peer and self-assessment may be considered a formative assessment because it helps a person to develop, unlike the teacher-made assessment or expert assessment. Similarly, I have considered this as an informal assessment as there are less formalities involved and many institutions are not practicing this peer assessment. Therefore, still it is not formalized. In educational context, since peers are the members of the same learning group, they have to some extent equivalent cognition level, equivalent age group. Therefore, they are free from stress, anxiety, or nervousness, or any psychological impediments to speak, argue, or clarify from each other. Therefore, peer assessment promotes dialogue and helps the learner clarifying things whenever that demands so. Peer assessment is that assessment in which the members are familiar to one another. Therefore, clarification can be done without any hesitation, and the feedback would be given immediately, and the learner would be able to, from the perspectives, multiple perspectives, they will be able to get the knowledge from multiple perspectives. Since they are the peer group members, it may reduce anxiety to speak or clarify, and it may build a good relationship and communication skills among the members. In a group, more the number of people assessing a person's learning, wider one's understanding becomes. We mentioned that it promotes deep learning, active participation, critical thinking, healthy argument, clarification, evaluation skills, etc. Finally, we could say that, therefore, it promotes knowledge exchange and diffusion. This is also not free from limitations. There may be so many due to some constraints. We have listed a few, such as these practices may make room for jealousy, hatred, or enmity among the members. Prejudices may result into discouragement. Feedback, though given immediately, may not be reliable. Negative feedback may lead to irreparable psychological issues in the learners, but a teacher can overcome by facilitating and motivating the members' learning and the members. Educational implications. As we said earlier, knowledge is proliferating and available at our doorsteps. It is always available, not even at our doorstep, but even at our hand. Now we call palm tops. Therefore, we need to know that whatever we learn in the classroom is very limited. It has so many limitations. A teacher may know very little, but if the adult members especially are involved in collecting information from multiple sources, involved in interaction among the group members and clarify things, that would promote a greater learning. Therefore, unlike the past, relying upon the teacher would not be alone, is not sufficient. To be someone greater, one should promote the self-learning, peer learning, self-assessment and peer assessment practices without being even the initiation done by your teachers. From the perspective of an assessor, assessment can be classified under different types such as